Hi, so I am Nicola Bailey, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm a really big fan of support for parents. Most of my working life has either been in the education sector or the teaching sector, the health sector. And all of the jobs I've had in those two sectors have always somehow involved me supporting parents in some shape or form. Whether that was on a kind of one-to-one basis, when I was a paediatric nurse working with individual children and their parents, or as a parent mentor, working with individual parents alone, or whether it was in a kind of wider context where I was an assistant head teacher, where I was working on behaviour improvement programs that would support the children and the parents as well, or as a founder for a community-based charity which solely focused on family support. So for me, well-functioning families are the blueprint of a well-functioning society. And to get there, we need to have support for our parents. And sadly though, that's not always readily available. And I'm always keen to spread the word that that's what we need. So you can imagine how delighted I was when I received a call asking me to be here today to talk about something I thought was really important. Guess what we're going to talk about? Actually, we're not actually going to talk about the general stuff of parenting and support there. I'd actually like to talk about something that I've noticed through all those bits of work in all those different environments. There was a common theme that I kept seeing coming up and up again and again, which seemed to either make or break whether or not families were successful and whether the connections were good there. What I'd like to talk about today is responsibility. It's not an exciting word. In fact, it's not just unexciting, it's also synonymous with words like heavy, burdensome, stultifying. And the phrase, ooh, he's taking on big responsibility there never comes with levity and humour, does it? Equally, in the home, when those words are uttered, who's responsible for this? It usually follows a misdemeanour plus a not so very fun outcome. And that's because the word responsibility means to be accountable, to be entrusted to act appropriately and in a timely fashion, and to take ownership of something. By definition then, that word is loaded with expectation, and therefore in association, it's also loaded with judgment. And that's the bit that makes responsibility unappealing and the reason why we're always so happy for someone else to take it. But what's the consequence if we don't take that responsibility? What's the flip side of responsibility? Well, the opposite of I did that is I didn't do that. And if I didn't do that, then somebody else must have done it. So this is about using the flip side of responsibility to blame. Now, Brené Brown, some of you I'm sure knows Brené Brown. She's a very well-known professor. She works at Houston University, and most of her research is based around human connections, which of course also encompasses blame. She's a master in her subject, so rather than me talk about exactly what blame is and how it all works, I'm going to get us to watch a little video and we'll see what she says about it.
Let me just tell you this quick story. So this is a couple years ago when I first realized the magnitude to which I blame. I'm in my house, I have on white slacks and a pink sweater set, and I'm drinking a cup of coffee in my kitchen. It's a full cup of coffee. I drop it on the tile floor. It goes into a million pieces, splashes up all over me. And a millisecond after it hit the floor, right out of my mouth is this: "Damn you, Steve." Who is my husband? Because let me tell you how fast this works for me. So Steve plays water polo with a group of friends. And the night before, he went to go play water polo. And I said, hey, make sure you come back at 10, because I can never fall asleep into your home. And he got back like at 10:30. And so I went to bed a little bit later than I thought. ergo my second cup of coffee that I probably would not be having had he come home when we discussed. Therefore, and so the rest of that story is I'm cleaning up the kitchen. Steve calls, caller ID. I'm like, hey. He's like, hey, what's going on, babe? What's going on? So I'll tell you exactly what's going on. I'm cleaning up the coffee that spilled all like dial tone. Because he knows. How many of you go to that place when something bad happens, the first thing you want to know is whose fault is it? I'd rather it be my fault than no one's fault. Because why? Why? Because it gives us some semblance of control. But here, if you enjoy blaming, this is where you should stick your fingers in your ear and do the na-na-na-na thing, because I'm getting ready to ruin it for you. Because here's what we know from the research. Blame is simply the discharging of discomfort and pain. It has an inverse relationship with accountability. Accountability, by definition, is a vulnerable process. It means me calling you and saying, hey, my feelings were really hurt about this, and talking. It's not blaming. Blaming is simply a way that we discharge anger. People who blame a lot seldom have the tenacity and grit to actually hold people accountable, because we expend all of our energy raging for 15 seconds and figuring out whose fault something is. And blaming is very corrosive in relationships, and it's one of the reasons we miss our opportunities for empathy. Because when something happens and we're hearing a story, we're not really listening. We're in the place where I was, making the connections as quickly as we can about whose fault something was.
It very well, but I'll just do a quick recap for you. Responsibility then is about making ourselves accountable for our actions and our inactions. And as Brené explained, accountability always puts us in a place of vulnerability, which of course is often a very uncomfortable place to be, hence why many of us are happy for other people to take the responsibility. But when we hand the responsibility to someone else, we hold expectations at the same time. That puts us in the role of blamer. So Brené gives us a really nice and fairly classic let's blame someone else kind of story here. But blame, of course, can be directed at inanimate objects and situations as well as people. Quick example. Last week, I went to meet a friend in London. She chose the day, she chose the location, and she chose the time. She turned up 20 minutes late. And her explanation to me was that it wasn't her fault because she missed the train because the planet Mercury is in retrograde at the moment. So we can blame inanimate objects and situations. And of course, blame can also come in subtle forms too, not just the blatant accusations. A lot of our communication, up to 93% of our communication in some situations, is non-verbal. So we can also find ourselves being full of blame and criticism of other people just through our facial expression, through the rolling of our eyes, through the body postures, and of course the tone of our voice. Blaming and criticising in this way is much less obvious, and of course it holds a get-out clause for the blamer if they're caught and then called out on, are you blaming me? I didn't like, that tone of your voice sounded like you're blaming. No, I wasn't blaming you. You always take it the wrong way, and suddenly they're the victim. So it can be very, very difficult to spot, but more than that, it can be something that they deny to others, but worse than that, they deny it to themselves. And this is something that I used to see day to day in the situations when I was working with families that were not working well. And I also heard it later on when I started doing some interviews for some research that I was doing. One of the mothers told me, and I'm quoting from the text here, I learnt the hard way. It's the subtler forms of blame and criticism that can do the most damage because they're harder to spot. Looking back at my first marriage, I see that blaming became an ingrained habit that was at the root of our love erosion. because I tended to use a subtle form of blame and criticism that was harder to label as such. And this went on for months. I felt terrible, and yet I didn't know how to stop it. The effect was that he, her husband, became more on guard and not as open or as warm as usual. I mostly thought that I was asking for things, when actually I was belittling him and condemning. It became so pervasive over time, it overtook our joy entirely. Oh, sorry. This lady used the word erosion, which is an accurate description of how blame destroys relationships. Brené Brown used the word corrosive. It's that gradual wearing away of togetherness. Now, generally speaking, families begin with love. They love for the partners, love for the babies, and each of us has an idea of how we see that love manifesting and how we want it to unfold. But when the going gets tough in our relationships, and it always does, family members are at risk of being hurt and disappointed, and it can be very difficult to accept responsibility for the disappointment and the hurt that are related to some of our own behaviours, even when those behaviours are driven by love. Sometimes our actions may also be the catalyst to behaviours we didn't want from our children or our partners. So let me give you another quick example. I'm currently mentoring a parent whose child has just been listed as a child in need and is now very involved with a concern with social services. Amongst other things, the child is often late to school, he sometimes falls asleep in class, and he regularly doesn't do his homework. Now, after chatting with Mum, it turns out that the child is playing online games until the early hours of the morning. And Mum says she can't talk to her son, and she's very frustrated about this. So I suggested that maybe she'd bring up this conversation at mealtime. And she just looked at me, so she just spoke to me, and she said, I take all his food up to him, so as not to, disrupt the online game. Because she loves him so much and she wants to get along with her son, she takes the path of least resistance and facilitates his happiness, even though it's detrimental to his well-being. And during our conversations, she's absolutely adamant that the reason for the current situation lies with a long-standing housing issue, school regulations, which apparently are really unreasonable, grandma, who's in the background, and her own mental health needs, which she has to go to the GP for control over. I'm sure you can all hear the denial in that of any personal responsibility there. But when Mum and I talk, I can hear her love for her son, and I can hear her distress at the expectations that she has of that love and the manifestations of it, and the frustration that it's not being met. I can loudly hear the blame that she's attributing everyone else with, and I can hear the fear that she might lose her son. And I can hear the rage when she casts around to find someone to blame. As Brené said in her video, blame is the controlled discharge of discomfort and pain. Blame is anger. And all anger is driven by a fear of loss. Loss of control, loss of love, loss of the special people in our lives, loss of possessions, loss of losing face in a situation, loss of credibility, and so on. Blame is driven by fear that's presented as anger, and therefore not only does it feel terrible to the one that's being criticised and blamed, but it also destroys the person's own sense of confidence in their worthiness and integrity, further shutting down any possibilities of that realisation of the love that sits behind it. Unsurprisingly then, the antidote to blame is the opposite to loss. It's acceptance of that horrible, boring, heavy, stultifying, burdensome thing called responsibility. But responsibility, when we take it, allows us, as Brené said, a place of ownership in the situations that we're in. Yes, it's arduous. Yes, it requires acceptance of accountability for something, and yes, it puts us in a place of vulnerability. But it puts us in that place of power and control, which offers us opportunity for growth and development through the possibility of being able to affect change. All of our life is iterative. We learn through our mistakes, our trials and errors. Nothing that we claim as a skill comes to us at the first try. The road to establishment is through experience, review, refinement, and incremental changes and improvements, all of which can only begin with ownership and responsibility. In fact, personal responsibility is the golden ticket to living our most empowered life. By accepting full responsibility for our words and actions, or lack of them, we're raising our self-reliance, which then raises our self-esteem. Having personal confidence boosts one's approach to problem solving. Problem solvers have less fears about getting things wrong because they can problem solve their way out of the errors that they make. In short, accepting responsibility enables authorship of our own life, and most importantly, puts us back in the driving seat. In contrast, when we blame other people or outside circumstances, we are essentially giving our power away. When we blame, the inference is how another person acts or what they do or say actually dictates our actions and outcomes in life, and that just isn't true. So, quick recap. Responsibility is about making ourselves accountable for our actions and inactions. And accountability always puts us in a place of vulnerability, which of course isn't comfortable. But if we give our responsibility to someone else or something else and still hold expectations, then that typically puts us in a position of fearful, angry, blaming without any power to change it. Taking responsibility liberates us from the constraints of others and allows self-growth and the possibility of being empathetic with other people in difficult situations. Taking responsibility for our actions means recognizing the areas of our life that we cannot control and the areas that we can control and change. For me, this area of no control is in the area of faith. Acknowledging when we have no control provides opportunities for us to learn how to get comfortable feeling uncomfortable or vulnerable. It's that space of trust in ourselves, knowing that we have taken all the responsibilities that we could and that we acted in our best abilities. But we also need to trust in the Almighty when He holds all the cards and we have no power. We need to have faith that our ability to be vulnerable and engage with that iterative learning is the strength of all of our relationships, not just inside our family, but also with the Almighty. And for me, this is what creates balance. But as with all things in life, we have free will. Like the mum I'm supporting at the moment with mentoring, you can choose to be the victim of circumstance, or like the mother I interviewed, you can opt to listen to yourself and work out what we're responsible for. The choice is always ours. Interestingly, in all the years that I've worked with parents and supporting families, I have never, even in the most dysfunctional families where all kinds of abuse was evident, I believe I have never met any bad parents. I think I just met parents who didn't know how to be good ones. Parenting isn't an easy job, and we live in a very judgmental society. It's far easier to stand back, look, criticise and blame. Maybe, though, it would be more useful if we shared our practice of vulnerability and humility and take the responsibility of sharing and helping others to find their power. I'd like to close with a favourite poem of mine that talks about the importance of sharing power. It's called Our Deepest Fear by a woman called Marianne Williamson. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine, as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us, not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. Thank you very much.